Now I move on to the backbench business debate, and I move on to the backbench motion on the international status of Taiwan. It gives me huge pleasure to invite Blair McDougall to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Backbench Committee for granting this debate. This is the first time I've stood in this chamber to back the democratic people of Taiwan, but I want to acknowledge those who have done work on this issue over many years, in particular the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, my former neighbouring MP Stuart McDonald. I'd also like to start off by recognising the Minister's long-standing commitment to human rights of people in this region, and indeed your own, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well. I'd also like to welcome into Parliament today the Deputy Representative Director and the Assistant Director of the Political Division from the Taiwanese Representative Office, who are in the gallery to observe this debate, which carries important bearing on our strong and vibrant relationship with Taiwan. Madam Deputy Speaker, the detail in the motion for this debate may seem esoteric, but diplomatic technicalities on an issue as fraught as the status of Taiwan could have far-reaching consequences for the entire world. And we do need to have this debate now rather than later. I think back to the frenetic last-minute activity ahead of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the emergency flights full of anti-tank weapons, the hastily drafted sanction regimes, the fruitless shuttle diplomacy. And Ukraine stands as a reminder that it's best to form policy on a crisis before the crisis emerges. The incremental changes to the status quo made by authoritarian regimes are likely a prelude to more overt measures, and that the best time to deter an aggressor is before their confidence grows. It's not possible to overstate, I think, the risks of a conflict over Taiwan. Leaving aside the humanitarian costs and the geopolitical consequences of another democracy being attacked by a larger authoritarian neighbour, the economic pain would be felt in every single household in this country. Because around 90% of the world's large container ships pass through the Taiwan Strait once a year. Taiwan produces 2/3 of all semiconductors and well over 90% of all advanced microchips. It's estimated that a conflict would cost the global economy not less than $2.5 trillion. But that estimate is calculated by the Rotherham Group using only shipping data. Bloomberg, on the other hand, puts the figure at a massive $10 trillion US dollars, about 10% of global GDP, and they estimate that that is conservative. The scale of the risk is why this is a debate that's taking place not only in this chamber, but in parliaments around the world. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China for their assistance, and to note that through their work, parliaments in Australia, the Netherlands, Canada and the European Parliament have all expressed their opposition to the distortion of UN Resolution 2758. And I gratefully give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Honourable, first of all, for achieving this debate, and secondly, for giving way. But the comparison point is really important. The figures he's given out for what would happen should Taiwan be blockaded or even invaded are worth relating back to the Ukraine effect. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we had a hit of about 1 trillion on global economy. He's talking about 9 or 10 times that effect on the global economy. So they are our neighbour rather than a far and distant land. Is he okay?
Absolutely. And while, of course, first and foremost in our minds should be the impact on people in Taiwan of any crisis, it would be felt by our constituents and their cost of living and everything that happens in this country. So it's right that this is a worldwide debate because, Madam Deputy Speaker, in addition to the military incursions into Taiwanese territory, the cyber attacks, the disinformation, the interference with shipping and aircraft, those things that make the headlines. And I should say I welcome the new government's expressions of concern over aggressive moves in the Strait. But this needs to be a global conversation because the People's Republic of China is engaged in an aggressive worldwide diplomatic strategy, especially across the global south. It's a strategy that aims to secure international acceptance for its expansionist One China principle. That is to say that Taiwan is a part of a single China and that the PRC is the only legitimate government of Taiwan, denying Taiwan's democracy any distinctive international status. Of course, Resolution 2758 does not mention Taiwan at all. It doesn't address in any way the political status of Taiwan. It does not establish the PRC's sovereignty over Taiwan. It is silent on the participation of Taiwan in the United Nations and its agencies. And importantly, it has no force of impact on us as sovereign nations in terms of the relationships we choose to have with Taiwan. So the current strategy by Beijing is a distortion of international law, but it's also at odds with the long-standing policy of the United Kingdom. And it's essential that this is contested and that this debate offers the Minister and the new government the opportunity to make clear that the UK opposes this effort from the Communist government to rewrite history or to unilaterally decide the future of Taiwan. Now, debates around Taiwan are famously full of symbolism. Which flag is flown, what nomenclature is used, which seemingly synonymic words cause offence. So it would be easy to write off discussions about the interpretation of Resolution 2758 as yet another finer detail that distracts from a bigger picture. But that would be a mistake, because this is not pedantry from Beijing, this is predation. Chairman Xi watched the near-unanimous diplomatic disapproval of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and he's seeking to reduce the chances of a similar chorus of condemnation towards any move against Taiwan. If the PRC's position is accepted, that the UN resolution in question endorses their sovereignty over Taiwan, then they will use that consensus at a later date to argue that any future coercion of Taiwan through arms or other means, whether blockade or annexation, would be legal. And similarly, any acceptance of Beijing's interpretation will also be used to argue that moves to prevent such coercion by Taiwan's democratic supporters is unlawful. So this is not a technical issue, but another source of increased risk for conflict across the Taiwan Strait. And I would ask the Minister whether she can confirm today, as has been reported, whether any assurances have been given to the PRC that the UK will not seek to counter internationally the PRC's efforts on the One China principle, and whether promises have been privately made that we will not make the case for UK policy with third-party nations, namely our position that Taiwan's status is undetermined. And I wonder, does the Minister recognise that any UK government acquiescence in the idea that the status of Taiwan is an internal matter for the PRC alone risks giving legal cover to any future aggressive acts? And would she recognise that distorting Resolution 2758 to pursue the exclusion from international organisations of Taiwan, a democratic self-governing people, undermines the legitimacy of the international rules-based order, not least as it appears to be inconsistent with the treatment of other disputed territories? And I ask the Minister, will the UK advocate for meaningful Taiwanese participation in all international organisations for which statehood is not a prerequisite? Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been moments of crisis in the past in the Strait of Taiwan that have flared up and subsided, in particular in 1996 and 2000 after presidential elections. But three things have changed since then that should make us more concerned. The first is that China is far more heavily armed. Already possessed of the largest naval fleet in the world, Beijing has been adding to it the equivalent of the entire Royal Navy every 2 years. They will soon have the largest air force in the world. The second change is that people on both sides of the strait have grown apart. The Taiwanese have more of a sense of their own identity, and their democracy is now deeply embedded, while China's populist nationalism has grown, and the PRC, which was hardly ever a free and open society, has moved even further in an authoritarian direction from Xinjiang to Tibet and to Hong Kong. Chairman Xi previously proposed to apply the one country, two systems approach to Taiwan. However, the systematic removal of Hong Kongers' civil liberties means that any promise from the mainland to maintain the freedoms that Taiwan enjoys could not be trusted. We know Beijing does not keep its promises. And the third change, if we're honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the West has been found wanting. We have been less than united, less than determined in our defence of democratic allies and democracy around the world. Xi has learnt from Putin's years of slowly boiling the frog, dividing Western opponents from each other, manipulating our populations and operating in the grey zone. He has learned that a gradual increase in aggressive acts avoids a strong strategic response from the West. So that mixture of Chinese armament, growing nationalism, increasing authoritarianism and Western weakness is a potentially deadly combination. Indeed, the military exercises and provocations around Taiwan are a recipe for unintentional disaster. Last year, there were more than 1,700 occasions where PRC military aircraft deliberately entered the air defence identification zone of Taiwan. PRC jets turn away when they are just minutes away from Taipei. During exercises, we see Taiwanese and PRC vessels in standoffs on the edge of Taiwan's nautical buffer zone. Meanwhile, we do not have agreed red lines around Taiwan with other like-minded countries, and worrying ambiguities remain. For example, a maritime and air blockade is normally classed as an act of war, but that isn't clear in this case because of Taiwan's ambiguous state. Can the Minister assure the House that the legal status of a blockade around Taiwan is something that's being looked at? Because I worry that we could have a situation where governments use this ambiguity as an excuse for inertia in the event of a crisis. And will the Minister take this opportunity to say that a maritime and air blockade around Taiwan would be a red line for this government? On so many occasions during the Cold War, catastrophe was avoided due to essential de-escalation protocols that prevented the misinterpretation of either side's intentions. And I'd be interested in the Minister's assessment of whether sufficient procedures exist between the military commands of Taipei and Beijing, as in such a febrile and nationalistic atmosphere, a mistake could easily be misunderstood as deliberate escalation, and control of volatile public opinion could easily be lost. Let us not forget, as was said earlier, who paid the price for the collective failure of the international community to deter Putin's aggression. It was first and foremost the Ukrainian people, but it was also ordinary working people who found themselves around the world with unaffordable bills. And if Bloomberg is correct, escalation across the strait would be, as the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite said, 5 times worse than the economic contraction post-Ukraine. We simply cannot allow that to happen. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, we talk a lot about protecting the status quo when we're talking about Taiwan, but we have to recognise the PRC is already actively working to change that status quo. But Beijing has not paid any price for this. Xi's diplomatic offensive hasn't been met with a commensurate effort from Western democracies. As they isolate Taiwan within international institutions, we haven't increased our engagement in response. And above all, there's been no sanction for the constant military intimidation or the grey zone attacks. And I recognise, of course, that careful diplomatic language is needed on this issue. But we live in a world where free and open societies are retreating in the face of authoritarians, regimes who no longer recognise the old order or even international boundaries, and who are seeking to recreate the world in their image. So I don't expect the Minister to depart from the delicate, long-established language that has defined UK position towards Taiwan since diplomatic relations were established with the PRC. And this motion doesn't ask for such a departure. But I hope that asking the Minister to put on record the government's concern at Beijing's distortion of international law around Taiwan, together with the editing of historic UN documents by Chinese officials, is not seen as an outlandish or hawkish request, but merely the least we can do when confronted with such troubling behaviour. And finally, with all diplomatic language aside, this debate is an opportunity to acknowledge a truth, that Taiwan is not China in one important way, that no amount of economic, military or diplomatic bullying by Beijing can obscure. And it is this, that the people of Taiwan are free and the people of China are not.
That's right.
Now more than ever, we must stand with democracies and against dictatorships. We must stand up for the freedoms that we claim are universal, regardless of where people live in the world. And we should stand with the democracy of Taiwan.
Yeah.
The question is, as on the order paper, and as the lead member from East Renfrewshire mentioned sanctions, it gives me huge pleasure to call my co-sanctionee, Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Deputy Speaker, I'll see what I can do to speak on your behalf, even though you have no opinion in this matter. We'll see if we can ascertain one in passing. Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for his securing of this debate? It isn't easy, as he knows, and I think it's really good to see so many people attend as well. As my right honourable friend, now sitting in the chair, pointed out, I'm one of 9 political sanctionees, and there are 2, it's always worth reminding ourselves, 2 others outside of Parliament that are also sanctioned, who spoke to me the other day and said, we're often forgotten in this matter, but we can't do business, and it's very difficult, and I wish to remember them as well while we're at it, unnecessarily sanctioned. The truth is that everything that the honourable gentleman has said is absolutely correct. The problem is we are dealing with now a power that is growing in potency and in totalitarianism in parallel with itself. So if I can just add something to his concept of how big this growth in military capability is, the honourable gentleman mentioned their naval capacity, but it's worth reflecting on the fact that right now China has 230 times the capacity for naval shipbuilding that the United States does. Any one shipyard now in China outbuilds the whole of the United States in naval shipbuilding. Somebody please tell me that that's for a peaceful purpose, because I have no concept of why you would need that many naval ships if your purpose in life is peaceful. And the answer is it is not. And this whole business of Taiwan has been obscured constantly by a refusal, I have to say, by administrations on either side. And I say to the Honourable Lady, who now will respond in due course on the dispatch box, I am not having a go at this government because I've been having a go at every government for a long time. It seems whoever's elected, I am now in opposition. And I make the point gently to her, she shouldn't take this personally, what I'm about to say. I am worried that politicians are elected to take decisions based on the principles that we govern by. And our principles are simple. We believe in free speech, we believe in base freedom, we believe in the rule of law, and we do believe in human rights. We may debate the elements and range of that, but we believe in the fundamental rights to decent treatment. I was sanctioned, along with my right honourable friend and others, for raising that yet then undiscovered, what was going on in Xinjiang, the undiscovered genocide, which has now become public knowledge, and which this Parliament, on both sides, voted to support that genocide was taking place, notwithstanding that the government at that stage simply said they couldn't vote for it or do anything about it because it needed to be done at the UN through the International Court of Justice. And they're never going to happen because this gets vetoed straight off. So the reality is that the Labour Party, in opposition, agreed that genocide was taking place and agreed on many occasions with those of us who had real problems about the treatment of people and the human rights constantly were in support of that. So I simply say that as a base reminder because this is really about what we really believe. The truth is right now that we have genuinely, from one government to the next, deliberately obscured, it seems to me, the idea of Taiwan's status. I have had people argue with me that this was settled by that resolution, which is often misquoted on the basis of 2758, that it somehow settled the status of Taiwan and that it was clear from that resolution, now that the PRC was responsible at the UN, somehow it was clear, therefore, that Taiwan was a part of China. It said no such thing, as the Honourable Gentleman said. In fact, it was deliberately obscure about that idea because it was not settled. And in fact, under the whole reign of the Communist Party in China, Taiwan has never been a part of a Chinese administration or a Chinese government. So Taiwan right now is a democracy. It is an upholder of human rights. It does have an agreement, like we do, that the freedoms of individuals to speak without fear of let or hindrance or of arrest, as we're seeing in Hong Kong, remains a base important component. So it does seem to me on that basis we should genuinely, as a government, speak out in their defence and argue that China has no right to extinguish that, other than that would be the deliberate indication that Taiwan would wish to be part of China. They have never believed that, and the last election demonstrates that that is still not their case. They do not wish to join China, as they have never been part of China. And what is also important, I think, is that this military build-up is not for just a general purpose. It is ultimately to try and displace the US's position in the Pacific so that they will be unable to act should China decide at some point either to blockade or to invade. And the incursions right now that are taking place anywhere else in the world would not be tolerated. I mean, there are huge numbers of overflying of Taiwan. There are their ships threatening right up close past the border of Taiwan, deliberately provoking in the hope that some action will take place which allows them to take action themselves. And it's interesting to reflect that if we just move our dial of gaze just slightly further south, we will then come to the South China Seas. And what we see is, again, China has occupied the South China Seas and declared it to be a historic part of China. Now, the UN in this case has said that is not the case and has told China categorically that they have no right to occupy or build now these military fortifications in the South China Seas. And what has China's reaction been to that? Nothing. They've said they have no right to interfere, and now they try to blockade that. In fact, US Navy ships still sail through there, but every other ship that is in there, including recently the Philippines Coast Guards, have been hounded out of the area, their ships rammed and threatened, and military naval vessels from China now occupying that space. So we know the concept of what China thinks of these things. We know what they plan to do because they've already done it. So the idea that we sort of wonder, well, if we don't say very much somehow, you know, that obscurity may well allow China just to back away. They've no intention of backing off on this, none whatsoever. They intend, it is part of their absolute creed now. In fact, it's very clear now, it's in their constitution, that Taiwan is a part of China. Now, that, I don't know how many more indications, by the way, that the Foreign Office needs to know that that is their direction of travel. So our question really comes down to the fact is, what does the government plan to do about this? To what degree will the government challenge this misinterpretation of 2758 publicly and to recognise the fact that Taiwan has a right to self-determination as we reckon that we do and all other democratic nations should as well. And I wonder if the Minister will take the opportunity to reiterate government policy on that very clearly from the dispatch box and indicate to the House whether or not she agrees that a public statement about what is going on in Taiwan, as the Honourable Gentleman asked earlier on, and I want to back him up on this, what we would love to see is clarity from the government that what is taking place now in and around Taiwan is utterly unacceptable, and that we should even think about moving in the Security Council to a sanction. Now, China will veto that, we know, but it's very important for the world to understand where China's position is. And if I just go back to COVID, importantly, we remember in COVID when all of this had happened as a result of failure in China, but the most important part of this was we were unable to get any of the figures about what Taiwan was doing, rather importantly, because they took some rather advanced methods to deal with COVID, which we could have learned a lot from, but we were not allowed to learn from them because they all had to come through China. And China refused to let us know what was going on in Taiwan because it embarrassed China, because they had taken very little action early on, and the result we saw was millions around the world have died. My point in this is, when we acquiesce with that, when we give way, as we did at the WHO, and when we no longer insist on these things, that weakness is seen as a success for China, and they take that and move on. How do we know that? We know that because back in the 1930s, every time we acquiesced to a new demand by Hitler's Germany, they took it and then moved on. You don't appease these kind of communist or fascist dictators by saying that, well, if we're reasonable, they in due course will be reasonable. The whole definition of a dictatorship is that they are not reasonable. And it's not as though China, rather like fascist Germany did, they told us what they were going to do. And China tells us categorically all the time what they are going to do. It is us in the West that does not want to believe that and think somehow if we're reasonable, they're reasonable. They are not reasonable. They intend to take Taiwan back, one way or the other. So our question for us, really, today and going forward, and for the Foreign Office, so I dare say, the unelected body that sits across the road, is why don't we get serious about this and understand it and say it? Because when you don't tell them that there are limits, then they assume that you don't believe there are any limits and they go ahead. And all the financial chaos that would ensue from any blockade alone, not even an invasion of Taiwan, would be devastating on our economies. So I had an argument with somebody the other day, one of my colleagues, who should remain quite nameless. There we go. He's not in the chamber. I have to say that that individual said to me, it has nothing to do with us, Taiwan. It's a long away from us, and we have no arrangements with it. And when I told him the point that was made, that the whack to our economy was enormous, I added one other figure which we had heard, and that was that 72% of everything made in the world is made in the area around the South China Seas, including China. 72%. I said to him, they're not far away. They're our neighbour. Because without them, anything that happens to them, we go down too. So the real point and the importance of this debate is to try and persuade the government to be much bolder about this matter and to recognise the threat and to recognise the need for a British government to say enough is enough, and that what happens to Taiwan is not just a matter of interest to us, but is a matter of vital importance. And I say that because many of us were on the conference in Taiwan recently, in Taipei, in which we heard all of the terrible problems that they face now as a result of the actions by China. And you only have to be there to realize just how devastating this is to many of them, whose lives are genuinely threatened by this. So with this huge build-up, with this clear threat that China poses, and with the brutality that they've already demonstrated in the South China Seas and the illegality of their actions, and the failure whatsoever to take any action other than the one that they wish to take, I think the important thing is for us to demonstrate stage by stage at every moment and every opportunity that we regard China's behaviour as unacceptable and we will oppose it. And one of the ways the government could start by doing that is to go back and look again at the risk register that we had started under the previous government. We should be moving China now onto the higher tier of the risk register. That would send a very strong signal to the Chinese government that we are serious about our behaviour. And I want to end simply by saying this to the right honourable lady who will answer. I know the government wants to increase and improve its trade with China, and I understand why they want to do that. My concern, though, at the end of it all, is we can't also detach our desire for commercial engagement from the real engagement, which is about the way that a state treats its people that live there and the way that it behaves to its neighbours. We did that in the past, and just look what happened. 60 million people died because we ignored what was going to happen, and they told us, and we wanted to do business with them. This time we have to learn appeasement doesn't work, and there's no chance that it will work this time. We need to be clear to China, as America is and others are, and say to them, this shall not stand, and we in the UK will stand for the freedom of those people whose self-determination is always a matter of our high concern, and we will defend it at whatever cost.
Select Committee Chair Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I also thank the Right Honourable friend from Chingford and Woodford Green. It is always a pleasure to follow in his wake. And the work you have done to make this House aware of the very real threat that China poses to us, it is astounding, and you have been very dogged in making that happen, and I'm grateful for that. I'd also like to thank the new honourable friend from East Renfrewshire. In your short time in Parliament, the amount of work you've done to show just how China is, well, exploiting the most vulnerable in really egregious human rights violations has been deeply appreciated. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to turn to you. And I can actually use you appropriately for once. What you have done in your time as a parliamentarian to campaign and champion the rights of the Uyghur people who are being so egregiously exploited in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region by China is so admirable. And may I say to you that we regard the sanctions China put against you as a badge of honour for defending human rights, and we're very proud of what you have done. Can I just say quite simply, I love Taiwan. I love the people, I love the food, I love the culture, but most of all, I love its vibrant democracy, which is one of the strongest in the world. And in this speech, I will share how its democracy very actively tries to help others around the world and is something that we all need to stand with. It will therefore come as no surprise to members that I would like to draw your attention to the fact that I co-chair the APPG on Taiwan, and I'd also like to draw members' attention to my financial declarations in relation to that. Because over the years, I've witnessed firsthand how Taiwan does actively contribute its expertise to support global partners, and that's something that we should celebrate, because Taiwan is a leader in the fields of public health, technology, clean energy, net zero, and so much more. But despite all that Taiwan has to offer, it finds itself barred from international organisations. Since 1971, China has repeatedly used the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 to justify its efforts to exclude Taiwan from the UN system, and it has done that hugely effectively. With a population of 23.5 million, Taiwan is the most populous self-governing state not represented at the UN. This exclusion undermines critical global cooperation efforts around particularly public health, climate change, and the realisation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Take, for example, SDG 3, promoting good health and well-being. Taiwan maintained some of the lowest case rates in the world throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. As it gained notable successes suppressing the spread of the virus, its exclusion from the World Health Organization meant that it was unable to share this expertise to the world. The official record shows that when the resolution was passed 53 years ago, its intent was merely to make a judgment on who should take up China's seat at the UN. That's it. The resolution bears no mention at all of Taiwan. It does not state that Taiwan is part of the PRC, nor does it ascribe any right for China to represent Taiwan in the UN system. And most importantly, there is no evidence that the resolution establishes, as a matter of international law, the One China principle. For all of these reasons, the resolution cannot be used as a reasonable justification to preclude Taiwan from international organisations. And as parliamentarians, we must do all that we can to contest the narrative that China's territorial claim over Taiwan is a settled issue. It is not. It is not an issue at all. China has no sovereign right over Taiwan. Resolution 2758 is one of the many grey zones used by China to encroach on Taiwan's sovereignty, and we mustn't collude with that. Recently, we've seen increased incursions into Taiwan's airspace, as well as large-scale military drills and advances close to Taiwan's contingency zone. The Chinese Coast Guard operations have been challenging Taiwan's right to control the waters around its very own territory. As China continues to challenge the boundaries and disrupts the rules-based international order, I am deeply concerned at the silence of the international community on these issues, and that silence will be interpreted by China as tacit consent. We must call out any attempts by China to establish a legal basis for a future armed invasion of Taiwan. We all hold a shared interest in the freedom of navigation through the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, one of the world's most important trade routes. When calculating the cost of a potential invasion of Taiwan, Bloomberg economists estimated it would cost the global economy, as others have said, around $10 trillion US. That's coming out of our pockets. This is equal to around 10% of global GDP, which would dwarf the cost of the war in Ukraine. Safeguarding the Taiwan Strait and protecting the rules-based order is within our national as well as our international interest. So whilst I understand, but I don't appreciate, diplomats and UK civil servants dancing on the linguistics head of a pin on this topic, I urge the Minister and this House to solemnly refute China's arguments on UN Resolution 2758 and to curb the PRC's ambition to unilaterally change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait and across Taiwan itself.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is indeed a pleasure to speak. First of all, can I thank the honourable members who have spoken and for their contributions. They're always exceptional, and I'm very, very pleased to hear them. In particular, can I commend the honourable gentleman for East Renfrewshire for tabling the debate. He did similar with the Uyghur Muslims in Westminster Hall. Madam Deputy Speaker, he's done similar again here today, and I thank him for that, and that gives us all an opportunity to participate. The Right Honourable Member for Woodford, Chingford and Woodford Green always brings his own personal touch to these issues. He's got a deep passion for this subject matter, and I thank him for that as well. The future of global democracy and the protection of human rights, the situation in Taiwan, the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, and the increasingly concerning violations of religious freedom and human rights in China. Let me first begin by expressing my firm support for the sovereign status of Taiwan, a beacon of democracy in a region where its survival is threatened by the very growing authoritarianism of China. Taiwan stands as a stalwart defender of liberty, of democracy and human rights, values that we in this House hold dear, and we all say that, and we will say that the day before others will follow. It is essential, I believe, Madam Deputy, that we as a nation stand with Taiwan as it faces increasing aggression from the Chinese government. The relationship between Taiwan and the United Kingdom has always been one of mutual respect and shared values, and it is vital that we strengthen these ties in the face of growing threats from Beijing. Taiwan is not just an ally in the fight for democracy, it's a living testament to the success of democratic governance in the face of adversity. Since the 1980s, Taiwan has undergone significant political and social reforms, transforming from a one-party state under martial law to a flourishing democracy with free and fair elections. In fact, Taiwan has rose 20 places in the Economist Democracy Index, ranking as Asia's #1 democracy and 11th globally, marking its commitment to the principles of liberty, of freedom and human rights. In contrast, just across the Taiwan Strait, the Chinese Communist Party seeks to erode the very foundations of liberty. China's increasing aggression towards Taiwan through military provocations, through cyber attacks, political pressure, must be, I believe, met with a strong response. The United Kingdom, along with other more liberal democracies, has, I believe, the responsibility to defend Taiwan's sovereignty and to advocate for its rightful place in the international community. That's why this debate today is so important in this House. It's so important that each member from all parties, from all sides of the chambers, put this on record. In 2021 alone, we saw a staggering 950 intrusions by Chinese military aircraft into Taiwan's airspace, a sharp increase of 150% on the previous year. It's very clear what they're doing. As the right honourable member heard, why are they building all these ships? There has to be a purpose behind all this, and where's it going? This shows the increasing military threat posed by China, and we must not ignore these acts of intimidation. The Chinese Communist Party's gross violations of human rights within its own borders. Chinese government has been responsible for some of the most horrendous human rights abuses in recent memory, particularly against religious minorities. Religious freedom is a fundamental human right. Madam Deputy Speaker, you and I know that. We all know that in this House, and how important it is to say that. China continues to systematically violate this right, both within its own borders and beyond. One of the most concerning examples of these abuses is the ongoing persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Reports from credible international organisations indicate over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities are detained in so-called re-education camps. Well, they're torture camps, they're intimidation camps, they take away the liberty and the freedom, and they subject families to all sorts of forced labour, torture, indoctrination. These camps are part of China's broader campaign to erase Uyghur culture, religion and identity. Their brutal repression is compounded by reports of these are horrendous, forced sterilisation, sexual violence and organ harvesting. China's treatment of the Tibetan Buddhist, Falun Gong practitioners, Christians is equally alarming. Tibetan Buddhists continue to face severe restrictions on their religious practices, with reports of monks and nuns being detained, tortured and even killed for peacefully protesting or for their religious belief. The ongoing efforts to erase Tibetan culture and religion as well, including the imposition of Chinese Communist Party approved religious leaders. My goodness, just pluck that man out of there. He can be your religious leader. It doesn't know anything about your religion, but he'll do it. That's the China that we speak out against today in relation to what they do. There's a direct assault on the freedom of conscience for Falun Gong practitioners. The situation is equally dire. Thousands have been detained, subjected to forced labour, torture and execution for their beliefs. Crackdown on Christians in China is every bit as severe. Church closures, the destruction of crosses, the imprisonment of pastors have become all too common. Religious worship, whether it be in a mosque, a temple, a church or a private home, is increasingly subject to government interference and repression. China's efforts to silence opposition extends far beyond its borders. We're looking at Taiwan today, but let's take a look at some other parts of the world where the equal focus of Israel is clear. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has sought to extend its economic and political influence across the globe, often using debt trap diplomacy to entangle countries in a sphere of influence. This has included pressurising countries to withdraw their diplomatic recognition of Taiwan and to instead align themselves with Beijing because you owe us so much money. And that's part of the deal. It's a gross violation of the principles of sovereignty and self-determination, and it is essential that we as a nation continue to support Taiwan in the face of these pressures. Moreover, as others have said, China's technological influence is a growing concern as well. CCP has made significant investments in surveillance technology, which it uses both domestically to monitor and control its population and abroad to future strategic objectives. As a leading global power, the United Kingdom has, I believe, a unique responsibility to defend the principles of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. It's essential that we not only stand with Taiwan, but also take concrete steps to ensure security and its sovereignty. The UK must work closely with its allies, particularly the United States, Japan, Australia and New Zealand, to build a coordinated response to China's growing aggression and evil attitude to have to everyone in the Indo-Pacific region. In addition to our military and diplomatic support for Taiwan, we must also continue to raise the issue of China's human rights abuses at every available forum that this government can do. UK must lead the charge in holding China accountable for its actions and ensuring that the international community does not turn a blind eye to the sufferings of millions of people under CCP's control. We do, and I believe we must also ensure that our economic relations with China do not come at the expense of human rights. It is unacceptable that economic interests should override our moral obligation to stand up for the oppressed. I conclude with this comment, Madam Deputy Speaker. Taiwan is a shining example of the power of democracy and freedom in the face of authoritarianism. We must stand by Taiwan, not just because it's in our national interest, but because it's the right thing to do. We must also continue to speak out against the CCP's brutality to human rights abuses and work tirelessly to hold China accountable for its actions. The United Kingdom must remain a champion of freedom, of democracy and human rights, and we must do so in the firm belief that these values will ultimately triumph over the forces of oppression. I believe it will. I believe we do the right thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a maiden speech. Alison Taylor.
Here, here, here.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to make my maiden speech during this important debate, and I only hope that I can acquit myself as well as the honourable members who have preceded me. It is an honour, as the new MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, to be delivering my maiden speech during the debate on the international status of Taiwan. Can I, Madam Deputy Speaker, congratulate the honourable member for East Renfrewshire on bringing this debate to the House. I represent a seat that takes in a part of the former mill town of Paisley and part of the economic powerhouse of Glasgow, with the welcome recent addition of the communities of Hillington, Cardonald and Pennylee. In my constituency, the towns and villages are brought together by the River Clyde and its tributaries. The Clyde, which stretches 170 kilometres in length, is well known for its shipbuilding and engineering heritage, and it's been for centuries the inspiration of lyricists, music and art. During this decade, a new innovation zone has been developed around Glasgow Airport, stretching out across the flat lands of the river basin, taking in the town of Paisley, the former borough of Renfrew and the village of Shannon. A new high-tech district, the Silicon Valley of Glasgow, links academia, research and industry. This project showcases the power of government intervention and central funding. With strategic assets like a tidal river, an international airport, the Erskine Bridge, Braehead Retail Park and the M8 motorway, my constituency offers so much to businesses to thrive. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, our connectivity, whilst good, requires improvement. A better bus network and a long overdue rail link to the international airport. With the Scottish constitutional question determined in 2014, there is now a real opportunity to foster political stability, create economic growth and reset international trading relations. My constituents badly need the economic growth that this government has made its priority. Already in my surgeries, I have spoken to many people living in unsuitable housing, temporary accommodation, or worse, homeless. As Nye Bevan said, a house, a modern house, is a most complex economic production. Every single industry is a contributor. What better way is there than modern homes being built to stimulate the economy across many sectors? Madam Deputy Speaker, my connections with this seat go back to the aftermath of World War II, when my family first settled in Bishopton. My Uncle Jack was a security guard at the munitions factory, now the site of Dargable village. In the neighbouring village of Langbank, my husband was raised on Middlepenny Road, his mother the local playgroup leader. Studying at what is now the University of the West of Scotland in Paisley, I graduated in land economics, and then, following in my father's footsteps, I became a chartered surveyor. My mother stayed at home to look after her 3 daughters, while my father grew his business in Glasgow. I myself am proud to be the mother of 2 daughters, the youngest born in 2017 in the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley, where we both received excellent care. Representing a constituency so integral to my family's history is a privilege that I hold dear. This seat is home to the former member for East Monklands, Helen Liddell, who now sits in the other place, alongside my friend Baroness Ramsay of Cartvale, who has played such a vital role in our country's security. As a chartered surveyor, I have been fortunate to work with inspirational clients and colleagues who were both innovators and entrepreneurs, and who taught me the long-term value of positivity, collaboration, and strategic thinking. It is that sense of opportunity that I want to bring to this House. I will work diligently to bring my entire life experience to bear on the very real needs of my constituency. I have established my constituency office in Shannon in the former India Tyre Factory, a stunning Art Deco building, which would have been there when my roots with this area were forged. I would now like, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say a few words about my predecessor, Gavin Newlands, the former Member of Parliament for 9 years. In spite of contesting the seat 3 times, Gavin was always courteous and polite. Gavin railed against exploitative working practices. He promoted the importance of the airport to this constituency, and he spoke up for vulnerable women who had no voice. I am sure that the whole House will want to join in me in wishing him the very best for the future. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituency is a fine mix of history and modernity. Like me, it has pride in its past and optimism about its future. I was elected to deliver on the change my constituents and my country need. It is an honour to do just that.
Phil Brickell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to thank the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire for bringing this important and timely debate. And I particularly welcomed his comments about other honourable, long-standing members working in support of Taiwan, and his remarks about this being a global conversation. I would also like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, on her maiden speech and her focus on driving economic growth across her constituency. Madam Deputy Speaker, China's increasingly aggressive behaviour towards Taiwan is yet another alarming example of its consistent and blatant disregard for the international rules-based order. As someone proud to represent a significant Hong Kong community in Bolton West, I've heard firsthand the devastating effects of Beijing's authoritarian rule. Indeed, many of my constituents were effectively forced from their old homes in Hong Kong by the destruction of Hong Kong's democratic freedoms. So let us be clear. Beijing's actions towards Taiwan do not exist in isolation. They are part of a broader pattern of behaviour that is China's consistent and blatant disregard for the international rules-based system. We only need to look at Tibet, where Beijing has systematically suppressed cultural and religious freedoms, and at Xinjiang, where atrocities have been committed repeatedly against the Uyghurs, and at Hong Kong, where the Sino-British Joint Declaration has been torn asunder. and now Taiwan. Beijing has escalated its military posturing, imposed economic coercion, and engaged in cyber warfare, all aimed at undermining Taiwan's vibrant democracy and intimidating its people. Indeed, China's deliberate distortion of UN Resolution 2758 is a prime example of how Beijing disregards the international rules-based system to push its own narrative. And I would like to emphasise, crucially, that Resolution 2758 did not address the sovereignty of the island of Taiwan, nor preclude Taiwan from having representation at the United Nations or other international organisations. Yet Beijing has sought to change historic documents and records, including at the United Nations, to allege the resolution claims that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. Madam Deputy Speaker, this blatant misrepresentation of UN Resolution 2758 is not just an attack on Taiwan, it is an assault on the integrity of the international system that we champion. This behaviour also stands in direct opposition to the UK's long-standing position on Taiwan. For decades, the UK has maintained a long-standing policy that not only is in favour of Taiwan's participation in international organisations, but also reiterates our clear interest in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, considering the Taiwan issue one to be settled through constructive dialogue, not force or coercion. Yet China's actions continue to flagrantly contradict this principle and threaten the stability of the wider Indo-Pacific region. Tensions are increasing, with recent estimates suggesting that there has been a 300% increase in grey zone activity across the Taiwan Strait and incursions into Taiwan's air defence identification zone. Beijing's grey zone activity in the Taiwan Strait is making it very difficult to establish red lines around Beijing's behaviour. Normally, a maritime and air blockade will be considered an act of war in international law. So I would ask the Minister whether she can confirm that a maritime and air blockade by Beijing around Taiwan would be a red line for the UK government. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to underscore the very clear public interest in de-escalation in the Taiwan Strait. We depend upon Taiwan for microchips, especially for the advanced semiconductors, which are critical infrastructure we all depend upon. Indeed, 2/3 of chips and almost all advanced chips are currently produced in Taiwan. And as my honourable friend for East Renfrewshire has outlined, Bloomberg has estimated the conflict will cost the global economy $10 trillion, more than 5 times more than the Ukraine crisis. And as we learnt from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, a failure to deter a conflict in the South China Sea will be of high cost for all of us in this place and our constituents. In 2023, then Defence Minister Baroness Goldie confirmed that the UK government was analysing the prospective economic impact to the UK of escalation in the Taiwan Strait. So I asked the Minister, will the government publish this assessment given the clear public interest? To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, Beijing's pattern of behaviour is clear. Each time we fail to respond decisively to China's disregard for democracy and the international rules-based order, it emboldens Beijing to continue to act with impunity. Taiwan is now at the front line. We must stand with Taiwan, not only to protect its people and democracy, but to send a clear message to Beijing. The systematic erosion of freedoms and the violation of international law that has taken place in Tibet, in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, and now in Taiwan will not go unchecked. By pushing back, the UK will defend our shared values, strengthen our global alliances, and uphold the international laws that ensure peace and stability across the world.
Marie Rimmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all congratulate our member from East Renfrewshire and congratulate our member from Paisley on her maiden speech. And it really is wonderful to have two from Scotland bringing so much knowledge and understanding on international things. It really is enriching for somebody here. It's my 10th year. So I have to say the contributions today, every one of them, so full of different aspects, you know, economic, public health, dictatorship, Communist Party, pure politics, not pure politics, full politics. And it's just unbelievable. But I'd stick to some basics here. But first of all, Taiwan, I've been a number of times, and I think I'm still getting over the last trip, which was the conference we were talking about, when you did, I don't know how many hours of travelling, or it really knocked me out for a 6. We didn't have very much long hours between the business over there. Anybody who thinks you're going to Taiwan, you're going on holiday, you're not when you're going from here, certainly not. But Taiwan is a wonderful place. I won't go on too much about it. It's a wonderful place. But to me, more than anything, it must be way up there in the ranks of demonstration of actual democracy. It's pure. We have much to learn from Taiwan. This Parliament has much to learn from Taiwan on how to conduct its business, believe me. And going round my first visit, I thought, you're coming to this place. I was thinking I was coming to a third world. No, I came back to something that favoured third world in comparison to Taiwan. That's how much it is. Believe me, it really is. But to go on to subjects, only last month, the People's Republic of China conducted one of the largest military drills off the coast of Taiwan in an attempt to intimidate 34 naval vessels and at least 125 aircraft. This tactic was intimidation, part of the debate today, and I think it enlightened, once again, what China is about. China is attempting to intimidate Taiwan and isolate them by insisting on this one China principle means Taiwan can play no role in international bodies. There is nothing in the UN Resolution 2758 that states Taiwan cannot be part of international organisations. Yet the exclusion of Taiwan comes with dangerous consequences to the world, as a number of members have raised here today, and very explicitly so. So I don't think I've any need to repeat those things. It's stated by a member from East Renfrewshire, just your introducing your speech today was just magnificent. It covered every aspect. It covered every aspect of it. And I congratulate you. It comes with such dangerous consequences, it's unbelievable. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, Taiwan deployed one of the most effective strategies against it in the world, despite its close proximity to China. Yet they were still excluded from World Health Organization and remain excluded to this day. It's worth mentioning here, on the forced organ harvesting thing I was involved in, China had an ethical organ transplant system. And when I researched it, found it, who decided that? Who determined that? China itself. And they actually admitted China itself. And it's still there. I think it's still got its ethical organ harvesting system, according to the World Health systems that they operate. This meant
It's quite interesting because she raises a really important point. If you talk to people who are practitioners of Falun Gong and other religious units, they will talk about the arrest, incarceration and illegal organ harvesting from people that are still alive, and also the high levels of state-based attacks and murders. It's quite staggering. They export more organs than any other country does in the world. I wonder where they get them from.
Sorry. Is somebody else? I'm sorry, I'm profoundly deaf, so please indicate if you want to rest. Okay. Yes, I don't want to go on too much about what the health organ harvesting. It makes sleepless nights, it really does. But they take the organs from people, 28-year-olds, because they get more for them. They've better chances of succeeding if they're fresh. They're still living when they're taken. You can order your kidney. You can order everything because you take a database on these people that's going in for the re-education. in those schools. They take the database so they can match us up. So don't worry, they would say to the world, we can get what you need. Just database, you can have it in days. Put there, in there. But you can't come back to this country now, or shouldn't be. Worth a question to be asked soon. Just how many have been prosecuted? There has been one prosecuted here that we know of, but how many have come back or got back? It's worth asking a question. Is the law being enforced? But going back to, let's get back to the main point we're discussing today. This meant Taiwan could not share their successful methods with the world when we needed it most. That was on COVID. The World Health Organization is only one example of an international body that Taiwan has been excluded from. China has consistently blocked any attempts by Taiwan, including in 2009, under the name Taiwan, to join the United Nations. This is the voice of over 23 million people still being blocked from being heard at the United Nations in one of the finest democracies in this world. In the event of any conflict breaking out across the Taiwan Strait, only one side would be able to put forward their case to the United Nations. That is no way the United Nations was intended to be. Why is it like that? Hey, presto. Putin, Russia, veto. What on earth? I can remember when it was taken in. I shivered. I shivered when it was allowed to enter into the United Nations. People thought I was mad, but we're paying the consequences now. There are troubling reports that only last month former Taiwanese President Tsai was blocked from visiting this place to address MPs and peers. President Tsai has had successful visits to Canada, Brussels and Czechia, yet apparently she was not allowed here. This is despite Taiwan being an important strategic partner for the United Kingdom in the Indo-Pacific. Sadly, it seems as though China's intimidation campaign continues to work. One of the best ways to push back against the People's Republic of China's intimidation campaign is to elevate the status of Taiwanese representative's office here in London. This would be a similar move to those taken in the United States and Lithuania. Right now, the Taiwanese representative's office are not afforded the protections they clearly need, and they cannot even get a bank account. Elevating Taiwan's diplomatic status would send a clear message that British government does not accept an enforced one China principle, and instead considers both Taiwan and China individual partners, should we say. The People's Republic of China was founded 75 years ago, and Taiwan has never been part of it. Taiwan is a thriving and successful democracy. They share our values. And refer to our colleagues right here. What's going on here is just part of China's plan. It was never part of it. They said Hong Kong was, and yet Hong Kong was going to go, and then it was hoped that they would join on to Hong Kong. Instead, what they did, they come along, didn't wait the 50 years to review and anything, and smashed it. And here we are on the next one, Taiwan. So you're absolutely right to raise that point today. It is time we throw off the shackles of intimidation and get strength that we should have and give Taiwan diplomatic status. If the British government leads with our allies, other nations will follow suit. Taiwan is a self-governing democracy that has succeeded despite being kicked out of the UN and kicked out, not allowed in, and other international organisations. They are a shining light of democracy in an uncertain region, and this world is desperately short of seeing these shining lights, seeing democracy, true democracy, in operation. The world is in desperate need. I urge members to vote for the motion today to send a clear message that this House believes Taiwan has every right to be part of an international organisation in its own right. And that's what the 2758 was about, in its own right. I shudder. I'm not ashamed of my religion. Some people would have you to be ashamed, but I'm not. I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm not holier than thou. But the shudders went through me as well when Putin got into, UN. When I heard, I think it was last year, it could have been the year before, time seems to go very quickly now, when Roman Catholics, were asked to register as Roman Catholics in China. Mm-hmm. And our Pope accepted that. What did Hitler do? That's how it started. And I thought, dear Lord, this sleeping tiger's not half woke up. And it's causing, and it's going to kill him. It's about time different nations, not just ours, different nations got their act together. So-called democratic countries sorted out this. In fact, China is more to be feared than Russia. More to be feared. It's part of the evil axle that will take this world over if we don't all stand up for democracy, for people.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always a pleasure to contribute under your speakership, particularly when your contribution to this particular issue has been commented on by other members is so considerable in your parliamentary career. I also pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North. Your passionate love for your community and your family reflects well on you, and also gives them faith that you will act in their best behalf on your time here. I also give tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, whose contribution to this debate is also noted, again spoken warmly around the chamber already. Experts often talk about the pressure points of geopolitics, places on earth where the strategic aims of different countries coincide, clash and create tension. What is far too often left out of these conversations is the reality of living in those pressure points for millions of people. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the Taiwanese people are living in real fear on one of these pressure points. It should be telling for all of us that despite being an advanced economy and a thriving democracy with high living standards and strong manufacturing, with cultural links to the rest of the world, Taiwan feels increasingly isolated and vulnerable in the face of the Chinese government. That is testament to the fact that no matter how hard they have worked to build a robust democracy on that island, it does not in and of itself protect those liberties and securities that we all deserve to rely upon. They deserve our support as we enter the second half of this decade, and this motion today can help us continue to do that. The Liberal Democrats stand with the people of Taiwan. Any Chinese aggression or threats to their free speech and human rights are unacceptable. The Liberal Democrats will continue to support our friends, the Democratic Progressive Party, the governing party of Taiwan, a long-standing member of Liberal International and a founding member of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats. In our manifesto, we called for the building of new diplomatic, economic and security partnerships with democracies threatened by China, including Taiwan. And it is something we will gladly work with the government to deliver, because an issue of this importance should transcend party politics, and I am reassured by the voices and the statements heard from around the House in this debate today. Fundamentally, what is at stake in Taiwan is a question of moral obligation, one that we have always had to confront and that Liberals have always been clear in answering. Can we stand up for people living outside of recognised sovereign states, who cherish the same freedoms we do and have the same inviolable right to self-determination that we do, against neighbours with increasingly imperial objectives? Or are we forced to live in a world where, as was said in antiquity, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must? Put simply, does might make right? The people of Taiwan deserve us to answer that question with our clear and resounding support as they go about trying to integrate into the system of international governance. Therefore, the government should listen to the story being told in this House today and make clear that in its dealings with the Chinese government, it will establish clear red lines, calling out violations of Taiwan's territory at land and sea as unacceptable. The government should work with its international partners to remove the obstacles facing Taiwan to joining various international bodies. Taiwan's exclusion from the World Health Organization serves to prove this point, has been commented on already by many members. Despite a successful approach to handling the COVID-19 pandemic, Taiwan was again rebuffed in its attempts to join the organisation, with China vetoing its accession until such a time as it gives in to their territorial claim on the island. This compounded our ability and the abilities of countries around the world to learn from the lessons of their successful response to COVID-19 and will have cost many, many lives. Taiwan finds itself unable to properly access and work alongside Interpol, leaving it excluded from the international crime-fighting network that it needs, not least because the South China Sea region is where international criminals are known to operate. This should concern all of us. Taiwan's exclusion from these bodies makes international cooperation harder. It weakens a strategic ally in the region, and it emboldens states like China and Russia to feel that their attempts to undermine the liberal world order will succeed. Indeed, how can we justify that liberal and democratic world order without ensuring it offers protections to those who subscribe to it and wish to join and collaborate with the institutions that are so key to maintaining that very world order? We've already left so many countries around the world vulnerable to the influence of states like China. The last government's short-sighted and naive decision to consistently cut the UK's foreign aid budget, slashing our international development credentials, shrinking our world-renowned diplomatic service, forcing cuts to our historic BBC World Service output, and undermining our standing as a major power on the world stage. These steps have left a vacuum in Africa, in Asia, and in parts of Europe too. We should not be remotely surprised that China has increasingly sought to fill that gap with debt traps and political influence through its Belt and Road Initiative. But it is up to this government to do something about it, confirming that the One China policy is not the policy of this government and that Taiwan will be supported in acceding to various international bodies would be a key step in the right direction. They must be willing to discuss Taiwan with the Chinese government as they embark on a new era of bilateralism with President Xi. I note that in the Labour Party's manifesto earlier this year, they committed to a new approach to China, being willing to cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must, as part of a wider audit of their China strategy. Those were welcome words, which is why it is disappointing to read coverage this week of the leaked news that Taiwan's former president, Tsai Ing-wen, had been due to visit the UK and speak with MPs last month before the Foreign Office intervened to cancel. I am keen to take this opportunity to ask the government to respond to this claim and explain to this House exactly why, as it seems, former President Tsai was denied a visit. We all recognise that diplomacy is difficult, and I sincerely hope the government can put mine and other honourable members' minds at rest that this was an oversight. But if it was not, and a decision taken out of deference to the Chinese government ahead of the Prime Minister's recent meeting with President Xi, the government will not be surprised to hear me say that that is unacceptable. The government's new approach to China should be characterised by a defence of our values and therefore the robust support of Taiwan. That is why the Liberal Democrats have called for the government to issue a comprehensive China strategy, which places human rights, effective rules-based multilateralism and working with our European partners centre stage. Without that, we risk further backsliding into a world where China feels able to act with impunity and Taiwan will continue to suffer. I ask the Minister to provide an update on when the government will provide this House with an update on its China strategy audit so that we can scrutinise it and ensure it lives up to those values. Just last month, China simulated a full-scale invasion of the island through war games in the South China Sea. As the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire has already spoken about, in late 2021 and early 2022, we watched Russian forces massing on the Ukrainian border, and we attempted to convince ourselves that the inevitable was not about to occur. And I will quote a great man who hangs heavy over many of us in this place: "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it."
What we're doing now.
Imagine living with the threat of such a war on your doorstep. We've all been paying close attention to the terrible scenes unfold in Ukraine and the Middle East in recent years. We all know that the horrors of war have not been eased, but rather compounded by modern technology. Imagine witnessing those scenes on your TV screens whilst knowing the very same could happen to your home and your family in the very near future. The journey to recognition and accession to international bodies for Taiwan is long and will not be solved overnight. But the government can play a key role in making that journey easier by showing its support for Taiwan as clearly as it can. And it can do the right thing on human rights in China more widely too. It can choose to recognise the genocide happening to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang Autonomous Region. It can stand with Hong Kongers who are already living with the experience of creeping authoritarianism from Beijing. And the government can champion the cause of international laws and norms in the face of growing disorder and violence around the world. I invite them to do so and to regularly report back to this House on such a China strategy is developing. Because Britain is at its best when it stands with those facing oppression and says clearly, with one voice, that the days of might makes right are well and truly consigned to history. Thank you.
I now call the Shadow Minister, Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, let me thank all members for their contributions today, not least my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford, who I think, yes, he's just over there, who always brings such knowledge and expertise to this place, and I thank him for that. And I also would like to welcome the new member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, for making her maiden speech and for sharing with us her passion for her constituency. And I think it's very apt that we have the presence of Madam Deputy Speaker in the chair, who also brings such knowledge of this particular policy area to this place. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, although we do not have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, there is nonetheless a valuable and dynamic relationship between London and Taipei, underpinned by strong commercial, educational and cultural links. We also have a solid partnership in other important areas, including health, and we saw that particularly during the pandemic. The work of the British Office Taipei and the Taipei Representative Office in London is highly commendable and benefits both of our peoples. For example, with a wide range of exchanges and visits, including on environmental, educational and judicial themes. And we, of course, have a significant trading relationship, which we call on the government to continue promoting. Trade in goods and services rose from £5.5 billion in 2014 to £8.3 billion in 2023, a very substantial increase. And we want more British businesses to benefit from Taiwan's impressive economy and prominent trade and investment links with the wider region. Within the current structure of our unofficial relationship, there is more we can do to maximise the benefits to both of our peoples, and we will push the government to do so. It's right that the UK continues to lobby in favour of Taiwan's participation in international organisations where statehood is not a prerequisite. And in her response, I would be grateful if the Minister could update the House on the government's current plans on this front, including with regards to the World Health Assembly and the WHO technical meetings. What the government must not do is overlook the risks Taiwan has to contend with. and there have been some worrying early signs which we want to see put right. On these benches, we do harbour concerns that the relationship Labour is carving out with Beijing is all give and no take. But today, Madam Deputy Speaker, provides the Minister with an opportunity to dispel the widespread impression that this government is making concessions with nothing in return. Labour has called in the application for a new super embassy in London and is desperately performing verbal contortions on issues that should be very straightforward, including the national security law in Hong Kong, which we firmly believe should be repealed. And we are not afraid to say so publicly. I'd also like to ask the Minister if she can name a single area where measurable, tangible progress has been made in advancing critical British interests with China, whether on national security, economic practices or on human rights. As far as I can see, we are yet to receive a convincing answer. But we are very clear that what Labour must not do is sacrifice the UK's voice on the threats facing Taiwan on the altar of closer relationships with Beijing. We have already seen signs of naivety. Within a day of the Prime Minister's meeting with President Xi Jinping, which he hailed as an opportunity to bring about a strong and consistent relationship where surprises would be avoided, 45 pro-democracy campaigners were jailed in Hong Kong following a very harsh application of the draconian national security law. It makes the Prime Minister's boast, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the UK would be a partner committed to the rule of law look rather hollow. But then the Prime Minister's response to these entirely unjustified jailings and his inability to sufficiently publicly condemn them has raised eyebrows too. It hasn't gone unnoticed, and we won't let this point go. The government needs to be much more clear-eyed about the threats and challenges posed by China, whether in relation to Hong Kong or Taiwan. We're concerned that by reports that the Foreign Office tried to exert pressure to postpone an inward visit by the former President of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. The FCDO has said it does not recognise the description of events set out in the reports, which in Westminster language, Madam Deputy Speaker, means they do not deny that this happened. So can the Minister give the House the explanation that it expects what did actually happen? Can the Minister also confirm that the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary have explicitly raised serious concerns in their respective meetings with President Xi and Wang Yi about any activity that risks destabilising the cross-strait status quo? Did they say, in no uncertain terms, that we stand firmly against any unilateral attempts to change the status quo? For reasons that are well understood, we have a very clear interest in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. It is our deep conviction that the tensions, which have understandably received a great deal of attention in this afternoon's debate, should be resolved peacefully. That is, of course, what will best serve people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, as well as the Indo-Pacific region and the wider world. That peace and stability matters for the rules-based order, for trade, and for the health of the global economy, and we shouldn't shy away from saying this. We hope that people on the two sides of the Taiwan Strait will renew efforts to resolve differences peacefully through constructive dialogue and not under a cloud of coercion or threats. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, much of the debate on this subject does of course revolve around the constitutional status of Taiwan and its relationship with China. But we should never lose sight of Taiwan's domestic achievements in their own right, because they are deeply impressive. A flourishing and vibrant democracy, a strong judiciary, one of Asia's most dynamic economies, a vital manufacturer of semiconductors, one of the most important pieces of tech in the world. So, for all these reasons and many more, we will press the government to deepen and grow our current relationship.
The Minister, Catherine West.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and could I say how apt it is that you are in the chair this afternoon, and how grateful I am to the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire for securing this important debate and for his first-class speech. And I thank honourable members for their insightful contributions and will try to respond to all the questions in the course of my speech. As two thriving democracies, the UK and Taiwan share a unique relationship which is rooted in our shared democratic values, cultural links and deep ties. And despite not having formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, we do have strong unofficial links across a range of issues such as trade, education, science and cultural exchange. And I must commend my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, for her adept chairing for the all-party parliamentary group on Taiwan, which continues to play a fundamental role in fostering these ties, encouraging greater parliamentary links and friendship between the peoples of the UK and Taiwan, and indeed visits. And while we have the questions on visits from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson and also from the opposition spokesperson, could I say that the best visits are the ones that are organised by the friendship groups, and indeed not having too much interference from governments. These links are driven by common interests such as security and prosperity, trade, innovation, climate action and global health. And in the first three quarters of this year, there were more British visitors in Taiwan than from any other single European country. Taiwan-UK trade was worth £8.3 billion in the 4 quarters to the end of Q2 2024. And Taiwan remains a key destination for UK enterprises in clean energy and professional services. The British office in Taipei and the Taipei representative offices in London and Edinburgh support the partnership, working in the absence of those diplomatic relations. Madam Deputy Speaker, the members of this House are familiar with recent tensions in the Taiwan Strait, and the member for Chingford and Woodford Green laid that out in his introductory speech, as well as the member for Strangford, who was very clear on that point. And our long-standing position is clear that the issue should be resolved peacefully by people on both sides of the strait without the threat or use of forces or coercion. Peace and stability in the strait matters not just for the UK, but for the wider world too. And as the FCDO's statement in October outlined, recent Chinese military exercises around Taiwan increased tensions and risked dangerous escalation. The member for Chingford and Woodford Green is correct to monitor very carefully the increased spending on the People's Liberation Army. The member for Bolton West is right to warn on the damaging elements of cyber warfare. A conflict across the strait would of course be a human tragedy, or as the member for St Helens South and Whiston called it, would have dangerous consequences, would also be devastating to the global economy, with the same study I think we've all read that Bloomberg Economics put out from January this year, estimating it would cost the global economy $10 trillion or 10% of global GDP. No country, whether high, middle or low income, would be shielded from the repercussions of such a crisis. And that is why the UK does not support any unilateral attempt to change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. Now, Taiwan is not just facing pressure in the strait, it's also being prevented from meaningfully participating in large sections of the international system, and we believe that the people of Taiwan make an invaluable contribution to areas of global concern, and the exclusion of Taiwanese expertise is a loss both to the people of Taiwan and to the people of the UK. So I reply to the member for East Renfrewshire in his excellent speech, where he pointed out about the importance of Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organisations, and as a member where statehood is not a prerequisite, and as an observer or a guest where it is. Of course.
She's mentioned the member from East Renfrewshire and his excellent opening. He did actually pose a question to her. I wonder if she would be able to answer it at some point, which is, does Her Majesty's government now consider that a blockade of Taiwan would be considered an act of war?
I can confirm that we have ongoing conversations with allies about all the risks associated, whether it is with the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea, which has also been brought up in this debate, or whether it is with other borders, including borders with India or any other borders where we have serious concerns, because there are a number of threats to global security. Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to make the case for Taiwan's reinstatement to the World Health Assembly as an observer. The UK has restated this several times, including alongside partners, in recent G7 foreign minister statements. Its inclusion would benefit global health, including participation in technical meetings and information exchange by the experts. The fact that a growing number of countries joined us in making statements on Taiwan's inclusion at this year's World Health Assembly meeting demonstrates that it's an issue that resonates not just in the UK or Taiwan, but with many in the wider international community, and we're very pleased to play that leadership role. We would all benefit from learning from Taiwan's experience in dealing with pandemics, which, as we know, do not respect different geographies. And on this point, and as members have raised here today, we believe there's a misconception in many quarters on what the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 from 1971 determined. The UK's view is that the UN Resolution 2758 did indeed decide that only the People's Republic of China should represent China in the United Nations. But as the member for East Renfrewshire said, it made no separate or additional determination on the status of Taiwan, and it should not therefore be used to preclude Taiwan's meaningful participation in the UN or the wider international system on the basis that I have already set out. And that is why the UK opposes any attempts to broaden the interpretation of Resolution 2758, to rewrite history, or as I have said, I do not believe that would be in the interests of the people of Taiwan, but neither would it be in the UK or global interest. Now, on wider UK-Taiwan collaboration, we'll continue to strengthen the UK's unofficial relationship with Taiwan because both sides derive enormous benefits from it, and because the UK is a believer in the importance of free and open trade. And as the member for Sutton and Cheam has said, the UK and Taiwan have strong cultural ties. Our thriving £8 billion trade and investment relationship encompasses a wide range of goods and services, not least the UK's export of over £340 million worth of Scotch whisky, which I thought is quite appropriate given that we had the wonderful maiden speech from the member for Paisley, and I'm sure she's a strong supporter of that wonderful export of Scotch whisky from her beloved Scotland, and just 2 days before St Andrew's Day. What could be better? Our enhanced trade partnership, announced last year, as the member for Rotherham mentioned in her contribution, will further strengthen cooperation in investment, digital trade, renewable energy and net zero. Taiwan produces the vast majority of the world's most advanced semiconductors that drive our digital economy, and it has a critical place in the technology supply chains that underpin global markets, and that is why we want our flourishing science and technology cooperation to continue. Just recently, the National Technology Advisor led a delegation of 24 businesses to Taipei for the Semicon Taiwan 2024 conference, where the UK had its largest country pavilion to date. The two sides also held the annual Semiconductor Dialogue and discussed the potential to expand cooperation on semiconductor skills, research and development, and supply chain resilience. I'm pleased to say we hold regular expert-level talks with Taiwan on a range of other important issues. Honourable members may have seen that our latest energy dialogue concluded just last week. We're also partners on climate action. Taiwan is a key market for the UK offshore wind sector, and our enhanced trade partnership will strengthen our cooperation on net zero technologies, which are essential for the transition to a clean energy system and for bolstering energy security. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, this government maintains the UK's long-standing policy towards Taiwan and relations across the Taiwan Strait. Parliamentary visits from MPs will continue, and I am sure of that given the feeling in the House today. Our collaboration with Taiwan is mutually beneficial, and that is why we continue to engage with Taiwan within the bounds of our unofficial relationship. We continue to be a staunch advocate for Taiwan's meaningful international participation, because Taiwan's invaluable expertise on a wide range of issues can only benefit the international community as we work to tackle shared global challenges. And we continue to work closely with our international partners to advocate for peace and stability and to discourage any activity that undermines the status quo. Before I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm aware that I didn't answer the question about the China audit, which was raised by front bench colleagues, just to say that we expect it to be ready for public discussion in spring 2025, but there's plenty of consultation happening in the meantime, both official and ministerial. And the Foreign Affairs Select Committee will also be approached for comment. The UK has a critical role to play in supporting continued peace and stability in the Strait through these channels. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Blair McDougall to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And thank you to the Minister, especially for restating government position on interpretation of UN resolutions, but also for celebrating Taiwan's society, economy and democracy as well, which I know will be well taken from our visitors. Can I say as well, I thought it was encouraging that so many members in this House spoke with one voice on this issue, regardless of party, and also that so many members, member for Bolton West, the member for Strangford, also made clear that the situation in Taiwan cannot be separated out from wider questions of human rights in the People's Republic of China. Can I say what a pleasure it was to slightly surprised I didn't realise the honourable member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North was going to give her maiden speech here, but I congratulate her on a wonderful maiden speech. She see why she's such a valued friend and colleague to so many of us. But you mentioned the former munitions works in your constituency, which is now this beautiful, peaceful, new build constituency community. And that made me think of it's almost a metaphor for our attitude in the world now as democracies. President Macron recently spoke about how Western democracies are herbivores in a world of carnivores. And I think we have forgotten the sacrifices and the strength that it took for us to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. And different honourable members reach back into different parts of history to make that point. I was particularly pleased with the member of Sutton Cheam. I'm currently trying to get my son interested in ancient Greek history. And so to hear someone quoting from the Melian dialogue in Parliament was music to my ears. The member for Chingford Woodford Green reached back slightly less far into the 20th century. But there is a pattern. There is a pattern where dictators will take a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And if they aren't met with strength early on, they will eventually ask for something we cannot give. And that is when it becomes a crisis, and that's when we have to make greater sacrifices. But can I finish by saying the thing I was most encouraged with this wasn't just a debate where, as important as it was for this House to condemn with one voice any attempt to change the status quo through force. There was also a celebration of Taiwan. And I should say that even if Taiwan was not a democracy, they would deserve protection from the international community. But they are a democracy, and so we should protect them. Even if they didn't have a vibrant open society and free speech, we should be seeking to show solidarity with them. But they do have that open, vibrant society, and so we must show solidarity. Even if they were not the dynamic economy and so important and so integrated into everything that we do in the world economy, we should be recognising the cost of any conflict there, but they are integrated into the world economy. And even if we were not in a global context where authoritarians are on the march, we should stand up and say that we would not tolerate another democracy being bullied by its nearby authoritarian neighbour, and we would not tolerate another society having to be forced into defending its own freedoms through force, when as an international community we can prevent that from happening. Thank you.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.